A warm afternoon had settled over the city, the kind of day where people hurried along the sidewalks without paying much attention to one another. Cars rushed by, shop doors opened and closed, and life carried on in its usual rhythm. Yet at the corner of a small diner, away from the noise and movement, sat a woman who seemed invisible to the crowd. Her clothes were worn and layered, her hair tucked under a scarf, and her eyes often lowered to the ground. She carried the quiet weight of someone who had been ignored for too long. Most people passed her by, some glancing quickly before looking away, others pretending not to see her at all. One man, however, couldn't just walk past. He had seen her many times before, sitting there at nearly the same spot. At first, he had kept walking like everyone else, convincing himself that she probably didn't want to be bothered. But something about her face, tired, yes, but still holding a certain dignity, stayed in his thoughts long after he had gone about his day. That day, as he walked past the diner with his lunch break approaching, he felt a strong pull to stop. He slowed down, then paused. People brushed by on both sides, some giving him odd looks as he stood there, but he didn't care. He turned toward her and offered a gentle greeting. She looked up, surprised that someone was speaking to her directly. Her voice was soft when she replied, almost hesitant, as if unsure if he really meant to talk to her. For a moment, the silence between them was heavier than the city noise around them. Then he did something unusual. He asked if she would like to share lunch with him. Her eyes widened, and she studied him carefully, as though waiting for him to take the words back. People often gave her coins or leftover food, but no one ever asked her to sit down like an equal. After a long pause, she nodded. He motioned toward the diner, and together they walked inside. Heads turned when they entered. Some customers stared for a moment, others whispered quietly, but he ignored them all. He simply found a booth and gestured for her to sit across from him. She sat down slowly, clutching her worn bag. Her shoulders tense as though expecting judgment at any second. The waitress approached, her smile fading slightly as she noticed his guest. But the man placed the order with calm confidence, making it clear he wasn't ashamed of who sat across from him. The woman sat quietly, her hands folded, her eyes shifting toward the window as though she wished she could disappear. But when the food arrived, warm soup, bread, and coffee, she hesitated only briefly before taking a spoonful. Her hands trembled, but her face softened. It was the first real meal she'd had in days, maybe longer. The man watched quietly, not with pity but with genuine interest. He asked her a simple question about the weather, and though her answer was brief, it carried a hint of surprise. Slowly, more words followed. She admitted that she had been living without a home for a long time. She explained how the streets could be unkind, how people rarely spoke to her except to push her away. Her voice carried both weariness and strength. As she spoke, he noticed something in her tone that set her apart. She didn't sound broken, even though life had clearly pushed her into a hard corner. There was something about her eyes when she looked up, eyes that hinted at a story much larger than the moment they were sharing. He leaned in slightly, encouraging her with nods and small comments. She didn't tell him much, not yet, but he could sense there was a history hidden beneath her guarded words. The meal ended, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled faintly. It wasn't the kind of smile one gives out of politeness, but the kind that breaks through layers of sadness. The man felt a strange warmth in his chest, the kind that comes when you realize something simple has turned into something meaningful. He hadn't planned to sit with her, hadn't thought beyond that one lunch. Yet as they stood up, he found himself saying he would see her again. She didn't answer right away, but her eyes softened, and that was enough. They stepped outside into the noisy street once more, but the moment felt different now. A bridge had been built between two lives that had seemed so far apart just an hour earlier. As he walked back to his work, he couldn't stop thinking about her, the quiet way she carried herself, the careful words she chose, and the lingering sense that she had more to share, Something told him that this wasn't just a simple lunch. It was the beginning of a story that neither of them could have imagined. And though he didn't yet know how, that one decision to stop and sit with her would soon change both of their lives forever. The next day came, and the man found himself glancing toward the diner corner almost without thinking. There she was again, sitting in her usual spot, her bag by her side, her posture guarded as if the world might push her away at any second. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if she would even remember him, or if she would prefer to be left alone. But then she lifted her eyes, and there was a flicker of recognition. It wasn't a full smile, but it was enough to make him step closer. "Would you like to have lunch again?" he asked gently. She looked at him for a long second, as if testing his sincerity, then gave a small nod. This time, the walk into the diner felt a little less awkward. People still stared, but he barely noticed. They found the same booth, and though she sat with her hands folded tightly at first, she seemed less tense than before. When the food arrived, she ate more slowly, not with the rushed hunger of the first day, but with the calmness of someone beginning to feel safe. Their conversation started small again. He asked about her day, and she told him she had walked across the city looking for places that might need help with odd jobs. She admitted that most places had turned her away. He could hear the disappointment in her voice, but also resilience. She didn't complain. She spoke as if it was simply another part of surviving. Over the following days, this routine continued. He would stop by during his lunch break, and if she was there, they would share a meal. At first he worried she might see it as charity, but it quickly became clear that what mattered most to her wasn't the food, it was the conversation. She told him about small things she noticed on the street. The kindness of a stranger who once left her a bottle of water, or how she sometimes found shelter in the library when the weather grew too harsh. Gradually, she opened up more. She spoke about how difficult it was to be invisible, how people walked by her as if she didn't exist. "You'd be surprised," she said one afternoon, staring into her coffee, "how heavy silence can feel when no one looks at you." Her words stayed with him long after their lunches ended. He realized she wasn't just telling her story. She was giving him a window into a world most people never saw. He found himself listening more closely, not just with his ears, but with his heart. One day, he asked if she had family nearby. For a moment, her expression shifted, as if he had touched something fragile. She shook her head, but didn't explain further. He didn't press her, sensing there was a deeper story she wasn't ready to share. Instead, he spoke about his own family in simple terms, hoping to make her feel less alone. Their lunches became a kind of unspoken agreement. Neither of them had said it aloud, but both looked forward to these moments. He noticed how her face softened more each time, how her laughter, though rare, was genuine when it came. It amazed him that such a simple act of sitting together could build a kind of friendship that felt real. One afternoon, as they sat by the window, she grew quiet. She pushed her plate aside and looked at him with a seriousness he hadn't seen before. "You're different," she said softly. "Most people don't sit here with me. They think it's enough to drop a coin and walk away. But you listen." Her voice trembled, and she looked down quickly, as if embarrassed by her honesty. He felt a lump in his throat, but he managed a small smile. "Everyone deserves to be heard," he replied. For the first time, her eyes stayed on his. There was something unspoken in that moment, a silent understanding that their connection was no longer about chance. It was becoming something meaningful. As the days passed, he began to realize that he wasn't just helping her. She was teaching him too. She taught him about patience, about seeing the humanity in someone when the world had stripped it away, about the strength it took just to endure. Then, one day, as they finished their meal, she said something that stayed with him. She placed her hand lightly on the table, her eyes distant but steady. "One day, I'll tell you why I'm really here," she whispered. Her words carried weight, heavier than anything she had shared before. He leaned back, unsure what she meant, but he knew in that moment that her story was far from ordinary. As he left the diner that day, her words echoed in his mind. One day, I'll tell you why I'm really here. It was a promise of something hidden, something that would change everything. He didn't know when she would reveal it, but he knew he would be there to listen. Because by then, it wasn't just about kindness anymore, it was about trust. The following week, something felt different. For days, the man went by the diner during his lunch break, expecting to see her in her usual place by the corner, but the spot was empty. At first, he thought maybe she had gone to another street, or perhaps found temporary shelter. But as the days stretched into a week, worry began to creep in. He didn't realize until then how much he had grown used to seeing her, how her quiet presence had become a part of his own daily rhythm. When she finally appeared again, she looked weaker, her steps slower, and her clothes even more worn than before. She carried a small bundle wrapped in paper, tucked protectively under her arm. He approached quickly, relieved but concerned. She gave him a tired smile, the kind that tried to hide how hard life had been in those missing days. Without hesitation, he asked her to join him inside the diner again. That afternoon, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. She sat down slowly, placing the bundle on the seat beside her, as though it contained something precious. He didn't ask about it right away, sensing she would speak when she was ready. They ordered food, but she only picked at her plate, her mind clearly elsewhere. Finally, after a long silence, she lifted her eyes and spoke quietly. "There are things I never told you," she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried an edge of pain. "Things I've been hiding because I didn't think anyone would believe me." He leaned in, encouraging her with his silence. She opened the bundle on the seat and pulled out a photograph worn at the edges, faded with time. He looked at it carefully. In the photo, she was younger, standing tall in professional clothes, her smile bright and full of confidence. She wasn't alone. She stood beside people who were clearly important, perhaps leaders, perhaps colleagues of high standing. The image didn't match the woman sitting before him now. "That was me," she whispered, before everything fell apart. She explained how once, not too many years ago, she had lived a very different life. She had worked a respected job, one that required education and skill. She had a home, friends, even a family. Her voice shook as she described it, the warmth of belonging, the sense of purpose she once carried. But then her life had unraveled piece by piece. It began with her company downsizing. She lost her job unexpectedly, and with it, her stability. She searched for months, but every door seemed to close. Bills piled up. Then illness struck, an illness that drained her savings and left her weaker than before. Around the same time, people she trusted most betrayed her in ways she never imagined. One blow after another pushed her downward until she found herself on the street. Stripped of everything she had once taken for granted, she paused, her eyes glistening as she held the photograph between her hands. "People think I've always been like this," she said softly. "They see the clothes, the place I sit, and they assume they know my story. But this was me. I wasn't always invisible." The man felt a tightness in his chest. He had suspected she carried a deeper past, but hearing it in her own words brought a wave of emotion. He looked at the photograph again, then at her, trying to connect the confident woman in the picture with the weary woman before him. He realized both were real. Both were her, she went on, sharing how difficult it was to carry the memory of who she used to be while living in a world that no longer recognized her. Every time someone avoided her gaze, every time she was pushed aside, it felt like another layer of her old self disappearing. "That's why I sit at the corner," she said. "Not just to survive, but to remind myself I still exist, even if no one else notices." Her words struck him deeply. He had always seen her as strong, but now he understood the weight she carried daily. It wasn't just hunger or cold. It was the burden of being forgotten by the very society she once contributed to. She looked at him carefully then, her eyes searching his face. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she admitted. "Maybe because you didn't treat me like I was invisible. Maybe because, for once, I feel like someone might understand." He reached across the table, not touching her hand but placing his own nearby, close enough to show he was present. "I do understand," he said softly. "And I'm listening." For the first time since they had met, she let out a long breath, as though she had been holding it for years. She carefully tucked the photograph back into the bundle, holding it close again. Her eyes looked both relieved and vulnerable, but there was also a small spark of hope. As though sharing her truth had lifted a piece of the burden she carried, the man walked away from that lunch feeling changed. He no longer saw her simply as someone struggling on the street. He now knew she had lived a life full of purpose, love, and dignity. She was not just a homeless woman. She was a person with a past, a story, and perhaps even a future waiting to be rebuilt. And though she had only shared part of her truth, he sensed there was still more. Something about the way she said, "before everything fell apart," suggested deeper wounds yet to be spoken. But one thing was certain: he was determined to be there, to listen when she was ready. That simple photograph had transformed his understanding of her. And it was only the beginning of what he was about to learn. Asterisk. The man couldn't stop thinking about the photograph she had shown him. The image of her standing tall, confident, and full of life kept replaying in his mind. It was hard to reconcile that picture with the woman who now sat quietly on the diner's worn booth seat. But for him, that photo wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof of who she really was. Proof that her present circumstances didn't erase the life she had lived before. When he saw her again, she looked just as weary, but there was something slightly different about her eyes. They carried the faintest trace of relief, as if unburdening herself had lifted a weight she had been carrying for too long. He greeted her warmly, and after their meal arrived, spoke gently. "You don't have to go through this alone," he told her. She shifted uncomfortably at first, shaking her head. "I've been on my own for a long time. People say things, but they always leave." But he didn't leave. Day after day, he showed up. Slowly, he began offering little things: a clean jacket, a pair of gloves for the cold, a new scarf. She resisted at first, not wanting to feel like she was taking charity, but he presented each gift without pity, as though it was the most natural thing in the world to share with a friend. She started to accept them, quietly, with a mix of gratitude and hesitation. One afternoon, he brought her information about a local shelter. He explained that they could provide her with a warm bed, even if just for a night. She frowned, clearly torn between the fear of being judged and the hope of some comfort. "I don't want to be treated like I'm nothing," she said. He assured her that no matter what happened, he would still be there, still sitting with her at their booth each day. Eventually, she agreed to visit. It wasn't easy. She walked into the shelter with her head low, her bundle clutched tightly to her chest. But when she returned the next day, something about her seemed lighter. "It wasn't as bad as I thought," she admitted quietly. "They gave me a blanket. I actually slept." It was a small step, but to her, it felt like a mountain had been moved. From then on, things began to shift slowly. He encouraged her to reconnect with simple things that reminded her of her old life. He brought her a notebook and pen, suggesting she write down her thoughts, her memories, even her dreams. She looked at the notebook with hesitation, then carefully opened it and began to scribble. Soon, writing became a small escape, a way to reclaim pieces of herself that had been lost. As the days turned into weeks, their friendship deepened. She began to trust him more, allowing herself to laugh a little, to share stories of her younger years, the concert she once attended, the book she loved, the career she had worked so hard for. He realized how much knowledge she carried, how intelligent she was, and how much she still had to offer the world. One day, a local journalist who often visited the diner noticed them sitting together. Curious, the journalist asked quietly about their friendship. At first, the man hesitated, not wanting to expose her story without her permission. But when the journalist approached her directly with gentle questions, she surprised him by answering. Her voice was steady, her words simple but powerful. She spoke not of shame, but of survival, of what it meant to keep going when the world had forgotten you. The journalist was moved, and asked if she would allow her story to be told publicly. She hesitated, fearing judgment, but after a long moment, she looked at the man across the booth and whispered, "Maybe it's time." He nodded, his eyes steady. Giving her silent reassurance. In the days that followed, the journalist worked on her story, capturing not just her hardships, but her resilience and the quiet bond that had formed between her and the man who chose to see her as a person, not a stranger on the street. As the article came together, something in her shifted. She began to walk with her head a little higher, no longer shrinking into the background. She still carried her scars, but she was slowly reclaiming her dignity. The man knew that change wouldn't come overnight. Life on the streets wasn't undone by a single article or a few kind gestures. But he also knew that the tide had started to turn. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer completely alone. What had started as a simple lunch had grown into something neither of them had expected: a friendship that was giving her the courage to dream again and giving him the reminder that kindness could change more than just one moment. Still, he sensed that the greatest moment was yet to come. Something was building, a ripple effect that neither of them could yet see, but it was on its way. The article was published on a quiet morning, tucked into the human interest section of the local newspaper, and later shared online. At first, the man didn't think much of it. He had promised her that no matter how people reacted, he would stand by her. But within hours, the story began to spread. Readers shared it across social media, comments poured in, and people who had never seen her before were suddenly moved by the woman who had once been invisible on a street corner. At the diner that afternoon, she sat with him as always, clutching her coffee cup, unaware of the ripple her story was beginning to make. The waitress, who once glanced at her with quiet judgment, now treated her with a little more warmth, even offering her an extra slice of pie on the house. Small changes but noticeable. The next day, a local charity reached out. They had read her story and wanted to help. They offered her a room in a community housing program, along with access to counseling and job assistance. At first, she was overwhelmed, unsure if she could accept such kindness after years of being dismissed. "What if I fail again?" she whispered. The man looked at her steadily and replied, "You haven't failed. You've survived. That alone proves your strength." She agreed to try, and with his encouragement, she stepped into her new space for the first time. It was nothing extravagant, just a small room with a bed, a desk, and a window that let in the afternoon light. But to her, it felt like a palace. For the first time in years, she closed her eyes at night without fear of being woken by cold or danger. Word of her transformation continued to spread. Donations poured into the charity on her behalf. Strangers who had once walked past her without a glance now wanted to help. Some left notes of encouragement. Others sent clothes or food. A few even offered her job interviews. Each gesture built on the next, creating a wave of support that seemed almost unreal. The journalist returned for a follow-up piece, this time capturing not only her hardships, but also the hope that had begun to grow. "It's not about me anymore," she told them softly. "It's about showing that anyone can fall, but with kindness, anyone can rise again." Her words touched hearts far beyond the city. Meanwhile, her lunches with the man continued. They no longer sat at the booth in silence. Instead, their conversation stretched longer, filled with laughter, memories, and even plans. She spoke about dreams she thought were long gone, perhaps going back to work, perhaps one day mentoring others who found themselves in her shoes. He listened, not with pity but with respect, knowing that she wasn't just rebuilding her life. She was reclaiming her identity. One evening, the diner was unusually busy. People whispered and pointed, not out of mockery this time, but recognition. A group of college students approached her booth shyly and thanked her for her courage. One said, "Your story made me call my grandmother. I hadn't spoken to her in years. You reminded me that people matter more than anything." Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled, realizing that her journey was already touching lives in ways she never expected. The man watched her with quiet pride. What had begun as a simple act of kindness, just sitting down beside her for lunch, had turned into something much larger. It had changed her life, yes, but it had also reminded countless others of the power of compassion. Weeks later, she began working part-time at a community center. The pay was modest, but the purpose was priceless. She helped organize donations, spoke with those who were struggling, and offered words of encouragement. Each time she looked at someone sitting in despair, she saw a reflection of her own past. And each time she shared her story, she gave them hope that tomorrow could be different. One afternoon, after her shift, she returned to the diner with the man. As they sat across from each other, she placed the old photograph on the table once more. Only this time she smiled as she held it. "I used to look at this and feel only pain," she said softly. "But now I see her again. She's not gone. She was just waiting for me to come back." The man felt a lump in his throat. He knew that while life wasn't perfect and challenges still lay ahead, the most important change had already happened. She believed in herself again. And he realized that her courage had changed him. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow across the diner's windows, he thought about the day he had first stopped, the day he had chosen to sit down beside her. It had seemed so small at the time, so ordinary. Yet it had set off a chain of events neither of them could have imagined. A simple lunch had become a turning point. It had given her a chance to rebuild, and it had reminded an entire community that no one should be invisible. Her life was different now, and so was his. Both had been touched by a truth they would never forget. Sometimes, the smallest gesture of kindness can ripple outward until it changes everything.